Well, hello everybody. This is a quick video just to walk you through the ins and outs of the hot tub mystery case study that we've recently completed in class. And since we didn't really get to discuss it very much, we did touch on some factors that affect blood pressure, which I'll review here, but we didn't get to dive into the specific aspects of this case that really make it interesting. I really love this case study. I think it's fascinating, and I think it really does a good job of giving you the factors that affect blood pressure and how they would contribute to this particular case. So, without further ado, let's talk about the factors that affect blood pressure. So, the first one obviously has to do with the blood vessels. Blood pressure is measured in the brachial artery, which is an artery on the inside of the elbow, sort of at the base of the biceps brachii muscle, hence the name. And you see a sort of visual representation of some blood vessels up here on the right side of the page. And one of the factors that affects blood pressure is the diameter of those blood vessels. Vasoconstriction is a phenomenon where the blood vessels get smaller and tighter, smaller in diameter. And vasodilation is the opposite. We talked in class about dilating the eyes and how a dilated pupil is very large and wide, and that's the same thing with blood vessels. Blood vessels that are dilated are expanded, the volume inside them is increased, and they actually constrict and dilate in response to temperature. If the temperature inside the body is too cold, blood vessels constrict, which increases the friction inside the blood vessels, which in turn generates heat that can help warm up the body. And if you're hot, like if you're going outside on a May day like today and it's fairly hot, your blood vessels may dilate and come closer to the surface to release some of the heat that's being generated. And as a general rule, the less space you have in those blood vessels, the higher the blood pressure would be if all the other factors are equal. So we've considered the amount of space inside the blood vessels. Now we have to consider the actual volume of fluid. If one is dehydrated, one has less fluid all over the body in all of your cells and in your bloodstream. And so less fluid would mean less volume, which would lead to a lower blood pressure. In turn, there are certain disorders that involve the retention of fluid, kidney disorders, certain types of heart disease, and that retention of fluid would result in more blood volume and would result in a higher blood pressure. So one of the things that often is done for those people who have difficulties with retaining fluid is they may be prescribed a diuretic. Diuretics in general signal the kidney to release excess water in the urine, namely they make you pee, and they can be prescribed for a lot of reasons. Both my parents, for various reasons, were prescribed diuretics for heart issues as well as high blood pressure. Certain types of lung disorders involve the retention of fluid in the lungs, and so Lasix can help to eliminate some of that fluid. The most commonly prescribed diuretic is something called Lasix. And it turns out that alcohol and caffeine are also diuretics. Often after a medical procedure, after you donate blood, they specify that you should replenish fluids, but that those fluids should not contain alcohol or caffeine. The reason for that is that alcohol and caffeine are both diuretics. They will increase the release of water from the kidneys, and therefore they would tend to lower blood pressure. And the last factor that I thought I would throw in here that isn't necessarily relevant directly to this case study, but can be relevant in general, is the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Now, epinephrine is often referred to as adrenaline. That's probably the term that you're more familiar with. All of these are what we call fight or flight hormones. They're part of your sympathetic nervous system that gets you ready to fight or to run. And they are hormones secreted by the adrenal glands that increase blood pressure. They have a lot of different effects, but one of the things that they do is they cause an increase in blood pressure. So Now that we know some of the things that affect blood pressure, let's break down this specific case. So we discovered in the course of our research into this case, as the investigators, that both victims, first of all, were dead on arrival. They had been dead for some time, according to the examiners. The hot tub was actually too hot. They had a hunch in the beginning, and they confirmed that with some measurements, that the hot tub was too hot. Typically, hot tubs should be around 103, 104 degrees at the maximum, generally in the high 90s as a rule, and this hot tub was 109 degrees. So clearly they cranked up the heat on this hot tub a bit, which may have been a factor. They also noticed that several bottles of wine had been consumed, and one of the people who knew a little bit about the family said that Clint, the male in this scenario, took Lasix before entering the hot tub. And as we talked about here, Lasix is a diuretic. In this particular picture right here, you may notice that Lasix is listed as an antihypertensive agent. Hypertension is sort of the medical term for high blood pressure, and so it's very possible that because of his stressful job and perhaps because of his advanced age and his busy lifestyle, Clint had high blood pressure that he was treating, among other things, with Lasix. So let's break it down. I wanted to take all of these factors and kind of treat them individually to figure out what may have happened. Let's first talk about the hot tub. So we know the hot tub is hot. This hot tub was hotter than typically is recommended, and so excessive heat causes many different cooling mechanisms to occur. We've talked about sweat, we've talked about the role of hair follicles and things like that, but inside the body, vasodilation occurs. The blood vessels expand and they get closer to the surface to release some of that heat. And so we would expect the blood pressure to be a bit lower in that context. Now, Clint took the Lasix, that diuretic, and the diuretic would lower overall fluid volume in the bloodstream and everywhere else, and that we would expect that to lower blood pressure, again, if everything else was equal. And, of course, they also drank some alcohol. Alcohol is a diuretic, a much milder diuretic than the prescription diuretic that Clint took, but a diuretic nonetheless. And we can't forget that alcohol can cause neurological issues. If you drink too much, you become disoriented, your coordination suffers, and if you drink enough, you can pass out. You can have a loss of consciousness. And remember, they both essentially had a whole bottle of wine. They found 2 bottles of wine there, and so we can assume that they had roughly a bottle of wine each, which is a fair amount of wine. So, I guess the take-home question is, what caused them to die? Now that, I'm not going to just give you for free. So I've kind of laid out the different factors and how they might affect this particular situation. Take some time to go back over this if you're stuck on the hot tub mystery and see if you can come up with some answers to all of the questions that are included in that case study. I hope I've given you a good foundation here. This should serve as a quick, nice little review before your quiz this week, and I hope it's helpful. Have a great day.